You know that feeling when you see something and you instantly recognize it? Like maybe it's a really tall building in your city or that one painting you always stop to look at in a museum.
I know what you mean.
Well, that's what we're doing today, kinda.
Yeah.
We're diving into one of those instantly recognizable images, Hokusai's The Great Wave off Kanagawa.
And you're spot on with that instantly recognizable thing. A lot of people even say it's the most reproduced image in art history ever.
It's like everywhere you look. And the cool thing is, you guys gave us a ton of info to start with, articles and stuff, even some
Yeah.
background from, well, Wikipedia, obviously. But here's where our deep dive gets really interesting. We're not just here to, like, recognize the image. We're going way deeper than that, right?
Absolutely. It's those hidden layers, the stuff you don't see at first glance, that make the Great Wave so captivating.
Exactly. So before we get, like, totally lost in the symbolism and all that, let's give everyone a little context. So this print is actually part of a much bigger series by Hokusai called 36 Views of Mount Fuji. Talk about an ambitious project.
Right. And even in this one image, you've got these three super strong elements. The wave, obviously, then those boats caught right in it. And then way in the back, almost just chilling, there's Mount Fuji.
It's like this little mountain peak against this massive force of nature, which actually brings up a good question for our listeners who maybe aren't, like, art experts. What style of art are we even looking at here?
This style is called ukiyo-e, which basically translates to pictures of the floating world. Imagine it. You're back in Japan, Edo period. Ukiyo-e was like a window into everyday life back then. Theaters, sumo wrestlers, beautiful people, and yeah, even landscapes like the Great Wave.
And this wasn't just for, like, rich people, right? This was art for everyone.
Exactly. These prints were super popular. People use them to decorate their homes, even fans. Think of it like art for the masses, mass-produced so anyone could enjoy it.
Which actually makes Hokusai's story even cooler. This guy wasn't some prodigy. He didn't become famous overnight. In fact, he didn't even think his own work was any good until he was, like, 50. Can you imagine creating your masterpiece after decades of working on your art?
Now that's dedication. He was incredibly productive his whole life, literally working until he passed away at 89.
Wow. And get this. He didn't create the Great Wave until he was around 70.
Not your typical overnight success story, huh? Makes you think about what we can learn from Hokusai, about mastery, about achieving something truly great.
So we've talked about Hokusai, we've talked about ukiyo-e, the whole scene. But now it's time to get to the really cool stuff, like all those little details that make the Great Wave so awesome.
Oh, I'm ready for this.
Like, okay, I always thought that giant wave was a tsunami.
Yeah, a lot of people think that. It makes sense, right?
Totally. But then I read those articles about the ocean, what was it, rogue waves?
Rogue waves, yeah. And those are something else entirely. We're not talking about your average storm surge here. These things can just pop up out of nowhere, like way bigger than any of the waves around them.
So less about a predictable natural disaster kind of thing and more about how unpredictable the ocean can be in general.
Exactly. Think about it. You're on one of those boats, right? You're not just battling a storm. You're dealing with a force of nature that could just appear at any moment.
Which, speaking of those boats, that's another thing that really got me. They're not just any boats, right?
Nope, not just any boats. Those are Oshiokuri-burn, specifically built to transport fish. And not just any fish, we're talking live catches. Had to get to the market fast before they went bad.
Okay, wait, so picture this. You're on this tiny boat, right? You've got that salty air, the smell of the ocean.
Oh, yeah.
But then you've also got the smell of a whole bunch of live fish just hanging out with you.
Not exactly the best smelling situation.
Adds a whole other dimension to the whole Great Wave thing, don't you think?
Yeah.
It's not just what you see, it's like you can almost smell it too.
It definitely makes the image come alive. And speaking of making things come alive, we got to talk about Hokusai in perspective. That was his thing. Creating depth, realism, he was all about it. But get this, he totally rejected all the Western ways of doing it that were popular back then.
Like he even wrote about how every single object has its own, like, special dimension, almost a universal harmony. Pretty deep, right? So how did he get that incredible sense of depth in the Great Wave without using those Western techniques?
Look at the wave itself, how it just curves over, like it's going to swallow those boats whole. And then way in the back, you've got Mount Fuji, right? It's like miles away. That contrast, the immediate danger of the wave, and then that calm, distant mountain, that's what creates the depth. It's brilliant, honestly.
Don't forget about that blue, that incredible blue.
That, my friend, is Prussian blue. Fun fact, it was a pretty new pigment in Japan back then. Hokusai had used indigo before, which is nice and all, but this Prussian blue, it was like nothing anyone had ever seen in a print before. So bold, so vibrant.
He really went for it with that Prussian blue, huh? Like he knew he had something special.
And the Japanese people,
Yeah.
they loved it. The way that blue just makes the wave feel even more alive, more powerful, it's incredible.
So we've talked about the colors, the composition, all those little details that make the Great Wave so cool to look at.
Right.
But like any great piece of art, there's always more to it than what you see on the surface.
Oh, absolutely. It's full of symbolism, open to all sorts of interpretations. Like some people see it as this representation of how powerful nature is compared to us, how fragile human life is.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that, especially with those tiny boats just getting tossed around like they're nothing.
Exactly. No matter what we do, we're still at the mercy of something so much bigger than ourselves.
And then there's the whole Buddhist philosophy side of things, right?
Yeah.
Some people say it's about how everything is temporary,
Impermanence, yeah.
Ooh.
That idea that everything is always changing, nothing stays the same.
which adds a whole other layer to the artwork, don't you think? Especially when you think about what was happening in Japan back then during the Edo period. It wasn't all peaceful landscapes and Zen gardens.
Definitely not. And speaking of different ways of seeing things, even the direction the wave is going in matters.
Really?
Yeah, so in traditional Japanese art, you're supposed to read the image from right to left.
Hold on, so you're saying we're looking at this wave backwards?
In a way, yeah. It's kind of cool when you think about it. The wave is actually moving against the traditional flow of Japanese art, like it's breaking the rules or something.
Wow, see, I would never known that.
Yeah.
It just goes to show you how important it is to understand the culture behind the art. So for everyone listening, now that you're practically Great Wave experts yourselves, what do you see when you look at it now? What stands out to you after learning all this stuff?
It's amazing, right? This image was made back in 1830, and people are still talking about it, still finding new meaning in it.
And it's everywhere. Music, modern art, even emojis.
Seriously, it makes you wonder why this image, why has it resonated with so many people for so long? Is it just that it's visually stunning, the themes it explores, or is there something else?
Definitely something to think about. And it actually reminds me of what we were saying about Hokusai himself, how he didn't think his work was any good until later in his life. Makes you wonder, what does it even mean to be a successful artist? Is it about creating a masterpiece when you're young? Or is it more about always growing, always trying new things, evolving your art as you go?
That's a great question, a really great question.
Right. And on that note, I think we'll wrap things up. But hey, keep those questions coming, keep exploring, and maybe you'll find your own great wave out there. Thanks for listening, everybody.